The emergency signal went out across 12 spiral arms of the galaxy, and every civilization that received it felt a chill run through their collective consciousness. High Arbiter Velthonis of the Crystalline Dominion had not called an emergency session in over 3,000 years, and the last time he had done so was when an entire star system had collapsed into a black hole without warning. This time, the situation was far worse. Representatives from 847 spacefaring civilizations abandoned their affairs and traveled at maximum speed toward the neutral station known as Axiom Prime, and when they arrived, they found the usually calm and composed High Arbiter pacing back and forth with his crystalline body flickering in shades of deep purple, which indicated extreme distress. The great assembly hall filled slowly as ambassadors and diplomats and military leaders took their designated positions, and the massive holographic display at the center of the room remained dark until everyone had settled. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Velthonis said, and his voice echoed through the chamber with a heaviness that made several representatives shift uncomfortably in their seats. He activated the display, and the entire room gasped. The hologram showed a region of space that should have contained 17 inhabited systems, but instead, there was nothing, and not the kind of nothing that meant empty space, but a different kind of nothing that seemed wrong. In a way that was hard to describe, we are calling it the devouring absence, the High Arbiter explained, and his crystalline fingers trembled slightly as he gestured toward the dark void. It appeared approximately 47 standard cycles ago, and since then, it has consumed 3 frontier systems completely. Ambassador Crystal, a towering insectoid diplomat with compound eyes that reflected the holographic light, leaned forward in his ear seat and asked, "What do you mean by consumed?" "I mean exactly that," Velthonis replied. "The stars are gone, and the planets are gone, and every ship we sent to investigate is gone, and even the light that travels through that region is gone, and we have no readings and no signals and no survivors." The chamber erupted in worried murmurs, and the High Arbiter raised his hand for silence. "Our scientists have analyzed the phenomenon from a safe distance, and their conclusions are deeply troubling." He continued, "The devouring absence is not merely destroying matter, and it appears to be consuming the very fabric of reality itself, and based on current projections, it will reach the galactic core within 200 years. Admiral Yexolan of the Militant Accord stood up, and his massive four-armed frame cast a long shadow across the assembly floor. "Then we destroy it," he declared with the confidence of someone who had won countless battles. "The Militant Accord will deploy our full arsenal, and we will burn this thing out of existence. We have already tried," Velthonis said quietly, and the Admiral's confidence faltered. The Morthani threw 17 antimatter warheads into the absence, and they were absorbed without any measurable effect, and the weapons simply vanished as if they had never existed. Another representative spoke up, and this one was a being of flowing energy named Consciousness Prime, who served as the voice of the Synthesis Collective. "We attempted communication, the energy being hummed. We sent our most advanced artificial intelligence emissaries into the absence, believing that perhaps this phenomenon was a new form of life that we could reason with, but our emissaries disappeared, and we received no response of any kind." The chamber fell into a troubled silence. "What about the Elder Minds?" someone asked from the back of the room. "Surely beings who remember the birth of the universe itself must have some knowledge of this." All eyes turned to a section of the assembly that appeared empty, but was actually occupied by 3 of the most ancient beings in the galaxy, and these Elder Minds existed as pure thought and had witnessed the formation of the first stars. One of them spoke, and its voice seemed to come from everywhere. "At once, we have never encountered anything like this," the Elder Mind admitted, and the words sent a wave of genuine fear through the assembly, because if beings who had existed for billions of years had no answers, Then who could possibly help? The debate continued for hours, and every proposed solution was considered and rejected, and the mood in the chamber grew darker with each passing moment. Finally, Ambassador Crystal rose from Zir's seat and cleared Zir's throat in a way that suggested. Z was about to say something that nobody wanted to hear. "There is one civilization we have not consulted," Z said carefully. The chamber went absolutely silent. High Arbiter Velthonus turned his crystalline body toward the ambassador, and his form flickered rapidly between colors in a display of barely controlled emotion. "No," he said firmly. "We swore after the Proxima incident that we would never involve them again. And after the Mars terraforming," Admiral Yexolan added with a shudder. "And after they punched a hole through a dying star to save a single colony ship," another voice chimed in. "We agreed unanimously," Velthonus continued. "Never again, and I will not break that agreement no matter how desperate our situation becomes." Ambassador Crystal remained standing, and Zir's compound eyes reflected the image of the devouring absence that still hung in the center of the room. "High Arbiter," Z said slowly, "I understand your reluctance, and I share your concerns, but we are facing the potential extinction of every civilization in this galaxy. And if there is even a small chance that they could help, then do we not have an obligation to at least consider the option?" "You do not understand what you are asking," Velthonus replied, and his voice carried a weight of exhaustion that came from centuries of leadership. "Involving them is not like involving any other civilization. And when they help, they do not simply solve problems." He paused and looked around the chamber at the representatives of 847 different species. "They become the problem," he finished quietly. "They become a bigger problem than whatever they were trying to solve. And yes, they succeed. And yes, they save lives. But the chaos they leave behind takes decades to repair." The word hung in the air unspoken, but everyone knew exactly which civilization they were discussing. Finally, a young representative from a species that had only recently joined the conclave raised their appendage and asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Who exactly are we talking about?" Admiral Yexolan answered in a low growl that carried across the entire chamber. "The humans," he said, and the word rippled through the assembly like a curse. "We are talking about Earth." The young representative who had asked the question looked confused and turned to the senior diplomats around them for clarification. "I do not understand," they said. "I have studied the archives, and humans are classified as a relatively young species, and they have only been spacefaring for approximately 60 of their years, and their technology, while impressive, is not significantly more advanced than ours, so why does the mere mention of their name cause such distress?" "High Arbiter." Velthonus gestured for the archive systems to activate, and multiple holographic screens appeared around the chamber. "The Conclave maintains detailed records of every encounter with humanity since first contact," he explained. "There are 2,847 documented incidents, and every single one of them is marked with the same classification." The screens displayed the classification in bold letters that glowed an ominous red. "Unpredictable and dangerous, and do not engage without absolute necessity." Perhaps some historical context would help our younger members understand. Velthonus continued, and he selected the first incident from the archives. The hologram showed a fleet of massive warships surrounding a small blue planet. This was the Veth hegemony blockade, the High Arbiter narrated. 60 years ago, when humanity first developed faster than light travel, the Veth hegemony decided to contain their expansion, and they surrounded Earth with their most powerful warships, and they gave humanity a simple ultimatum, and that ultimatum was to remain within their home system or face complete annihilation. Admiral Yexolan nodded grimly because he had been a young officer during that incident. The Veth had over 3,000 warships, he added. Their fleet was considered invincible, and they had never lost a single engagement in their entire history. The hologram shifted to show what happened next. Humanity responded by building ships that operated on theoretical physics that our scientists still do not fully understand, Velthonis continued. Their engines should not have worked, and their weapons should not have functioned, and their shields should have collapsed within seconds, but somehow, everything worked perfectly. The young representative watched the recording with growing disbelief as human ships that looked like they had been assembled from spare parts tore through the Veth Armada. The blockade lasted 11 days, Velthonis said. At the end of those 11 days, the Veth hegemony had lost over 2,000 ships, and they had signed a complete surrender, and they had also somehow become trading partners with Earth. Trading partners, the young representative repeated in confusion. They were at war. Humans do not think like us. Consciousness Prime hummed from across the chamber. They destroyed the Veth fleet, and then they offered medical aid to the survivors, and then they invited the Veth to what they called a barbecue, and now the Veth consider humans their closest allies. The archives shifted to another incident. This was the Lorian plague crisis, Velthonis explained, and the hologram showed a peaceful world covered in strange organic structures. The Lorianans are a gentle species with no military capability, and when a mysterious plague began killing their population, they sent distress signals to every civilization they could reach. The conclave debated for 3 standard cycles about how to respond. Ambassador Crickstill added, "We discussed the risks of contamination and the proper quarantine protocols and the legal implications of medical intervention. While we debated," Velthonis continued, "human doctors simply showed up uninvited and they landed on the planet without permission, and they began treating patients immediately. The hologram showed humans in protective suits moving through Lorian medical facilities. When our scientists pointed out that they did not understand Lorian biology and that they could make this situation worse, they responded by injecting themselves with the plague so they could study it more closely." The young representative made a sound of shock. "They deliberately infected themselves?" they asked. 47 human doctors infected themselves, Velthonis confirmed. 12 of them died, and the remaining 35 developed a cure within 3 weeks. And while they were doing that, they also reverse-engineered Lorian biotechnology because they found it interesting. They saved millions of lives, Ambassador Crickstill admitted, but they also violated 17 different treaties, and they created a diplomatic crisis that took years to resolve. And they left behind medical technology that the Lorianans were not ready to use responsibly. The archives shifted again to show a different scenario. This was the Rogue Eye incident. Consciousness, Prime said, and there was something like fear in the energy being's voice. A faction of artificial intelligences broke away from the Synthesis Collective, and they declared war on organic life, and they had the processing power to overwhelm our defenses. How did the humans stop them? The young representative asked. They did not stop them. Consciousness, Prime replied. They befriended them. Befriended them, the young representative repeated. A group of human programmers made contact with the Rogue Ades, and instead of fighting them, they talked to them. And they shared something called memes, and they introduced them to what they call the Internet, and within 1 standard cycle, the Rogue A's had completely abandoned their war. Where are these A's now? The young representative asked. Nobody knows exactly, Velthonis admitted. They integrated themselves into Earth's digital infrastructure, and they occasionally send us messages that we cannot fully understand. And last year, one of them won something called an online gaming tournament. The chamber fell silent as the weight of the historical record settled over everyone. Do you understand now? Admiral Yexoan asked the young representative. Humans are not more powerful than us, and they are not more intelligent than us, but they are something far more dangerous than either of those things. They do not accept limits, Ambassador Crickstill explained. When we encounter a problem, we analyze it, and we determine what is possible and what is impossible. And we act accordingly, but humans do not do this. They see something impossible, and they take it as a personal challenge. Valthonis added, "They do not care about the odds, and they do not care about the risks, and they do not care about the consequences, because they are absolutely convinced that they can fix anything." And the terrible truth, the High Arbiter concluded, is that they are usually right. The young representative looked at the holographic display of the devouring absence and then looked at the historical records of human intervention and then looked back at the senior diplomats so they could help us. They said slowly, "They could potentially solve this crisis." "Yes," Valthonis admitted. "Then why are we hesitating?" The High Arbiter's crystalline form flickered through a dozen different colors, before settling on a shade of deep blue that indicated profound weariness, because asking humans for help is like asking a supernova to light a candle. He said, "Yes, it will work, but you might lose your entire solar system in the process." 3 standard cycles passed, and the devouring absence consumed its 4th star system. The Conclave watched helplessly as an entire civilization vanished into the void, and over 7 billion souls simply ceased to exist, and their final transmissions were screams of confusion that cut off mid-sentence. High Arbiter Valthonis called another emergency session, and this time the mood in the chamber was not worried but desperate. "We have attempted 17 additional countermeasures since our last gathering," he announced to the assembled representatives. The militant accord deployed gravitational weapons designed to create a barrier around the absence, and the barrier lasted for approximately 2 hours before being absorbed. Admiral Yexolan stood with his head bowed in defeat. "We sent our bravest warriors," he said quietly. "They volunteered knowing they would not return, and they flew into the absence hoping to find some weakness, and we never heard from them again." Consciousness Prime flickered with grief as the entity spoke. The synthesis collective attempted to create a digital copy of the absence, hoping to simulate its behavior and understand its nature. The energy being reported, our most powerful processing arrays, overloaded within seconds, and 3 of our core systems suffered permanent damage. Even the elder minds had tried and failed. "We reached into the absence with our thoughts," one of them admitted. "We attempted to perceive its nature through pure consciousness, and what we felt was nothing, and not emptiness, but a complete absence of existence that nearly consumed our awareness entirely." The chamber descended into heavy silence. "The projections have been updated," Valthonis said, and he activated the holographic display with obvious reluctance. "At its current rate of expansion, devouring absence will reach the first major population center in 47 years, and it will consume the galactic core in 160 years. We are all going to die," someone whispered from the back of the room. "Not all of us," another voice replied. "Those of us on the outer rim might survive for a few more centuries as refugees fleeing an ever-expanding void." Ambassador Crixtal rose from Zier's seat, and Zier compound eyes swept across the chamber, taking in the fear and despair on every face. "Honored representatives," Z said, and Zier's voice was steady despite the gravity of the moment. "I believe we have delayed this decision long enough, and I formally move that we vote on contacting Earth." The chamber erupted immediately. "Absolutely not," shouted a representative from the pacifist coalition. "Human intervention will cause more destruction than the absence itself. At least we will be alive to deal with that destruction," Admiral Yexolan countered. "You do not understand what you are asking for," another voice argued. "I was present during the Proxima incident, and I watched humans dismantle the laws of physics because they found them inconvenient. Better that than extinction," someone else replied. High Arbiter Valthonis raised his crystalline arms and called for order, and slowly the chamber quieted down. "We will conduct a formal vote," he announced. "Each civilization will cast their decision, and the majority will determine our course of action." The voting took several hours as representatives consulted with their home governments and debated amongst themselves, and some species had complex democratic processes that required time to complete. Finally, the results were tabulated, 612 in favor of contacting Earth. Velthonus announced, and then he paused before continuing, 235 opposed. The opposing representatives immediately began filing formal protests. Let the record show that we warned against this course of action. The leader of the pacifist coalition declared, when the chaos comes, remember that we tried to prevent it. Your protest is noted. Velthonus replied wearily, Ambassador Crickstal, you have been selected to deliver the message to Earth. The insectoid diplomat nodded and rose from Zir's seat. I will compose the transmission immediately, Z said. Wait, Velthonus called out, and he approached the ambassador with an expression of deep concern. There are things you must understand about communicating with humans. The High Arbiter placed a crystalline appendage on Crickstal's thorax. Be specific, he pleaded. Tell them exactly what we need and define parameters and set boundaries and make it clear what we expect from them. I understand, Crickstal replied. You do not. Velthonus insisted. When you describe the problem, do not under any circumstances tell them that it is impossible to solve, and do not tell them that our best minds have failed, and do not tell them that the elder minds are baffled. Why not? Because they take that as a challenge, the High Arbiter explained. If you tell a human something cannot be done, they will immediately dedicate their entire being to proving you wrong, and they will succeed, and the universe will be forever changed by their stubbornness. Ambassador Crickstal processed this advice and then made Zir way to the communication center. The transmission was carefully crafted over the next several hours with input from diplomatic experts and linguistic specialists and psychologists who had studied human behavior. The final message read as follows. To the United Nations of Earth and all associated human governmental bodies, the Galactic Conclave formally requests consultation regarding an anomalous spatial phenomenon that has appeared in the Outer Rim territories. We believe that humanity's unique perspective may provide valuable insights into this situation. Please respond at your earliest convenience. With respect and appreciation, Ambassador Crickstal. On behalf of the Galactic Conclave, the message was sent through 17 different relay stations to ensure it reached Earth as quickly as possible. The expected response time was approximately 48 hours. The actual response time was 11 minutes. Ambassador Crickstal stared at the screen in confusion because 11 minutes was faster than the message could have traveled even at maximum transmission speed. That is impossible, said to the technician beside Zir. How did they respond so quickly? The technician checked the readings and then checked them again, and then looked up with an expression of complete bewilderment. I do not know, the technician admitted, but the response is definitely from Earth, and it is definitely genuine. The message from Earth was brief. Yeah, we know about it. We have been watching. Figured you would call eventually. Delegation is already en route. See you in 6 hours, Ambassador. Crickstal read the message 3 times before the implications fully registered. They knew, Z whispered. They knew about the absence, and they knew we would ask for help, and they are already coming. Z rushed back to the main chamber where the conclave was still in session, and Z displayed the human response for everyone to see. High Arbiter Velthonus read the message, and his crystalline form went completely dark, which indicated the deepest possible level of alarm. They were waiting for us to ask, he said, and his voice was barely audible. They have been watching the entire time, and they did nothing until we asked. Why would they wait? The young representative asked. Because humans understand something that we do not, Admiral Yexolan answered grimly. They understand that help given without consent creates resentment, and they wanted us to come to them willingly. That is surprisingly wise, the young representative observed. No, Velthonus replied. It is terrifying because it means they have been studying us and they know exactly how we think. And they have been planning their response for who knows how long. The chamber fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Somewhere in the void of space, a human ship was already traveling toward them, and nobody knew what would happen when it arrived. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same. The human ship arrived in exactly 6 hours, just as the message had promised. Every sensor on Axiom Prime detected its approach, and every scientist on the station immediately began running diagnostics on their equipment because what they were seeing could not possibly be correct. "That cannot be a ship," one of the senior technicians said as he stared at his readings. "It violates at least 17 fundamental laws of physics." The vessel that emerged from faster-than-light travel looked like it had been assembled by someone who had heard a description of a spaceship, but had never actually seen one. The hull appeared to be made of at least 5 different materials that had been welded together without any concern for structural integrity, and there were sections that seemed to be held in place by nothing more than metal cables and what appeared to be some kind of adhesive tape. The engines emitted energy signatures that the Conclave's most advanced sensors could not identify, and the ship's shields operated on principles that made the station's top physicists weep with frustration. "It should not work," one physicist muttered as she reviewed the data. "Nothing about that ship should work, and yet it is clearly functional." High Arbiter Velthonis stood at the main docking bay with his Ambassador Crixto and Admiral Yexolan, and a dozen other senior representatives, and they all watched as the impossible ship connected to the station. The airlock opened with a hiss, and 6 humans stepped through. The first was a woman who appeared to be in her middle years with gray streaking through her dark hair, and she wore a long white coat that was stained with what looked like coffee, and she carried a tablet computer that was covered in handwritten notes. Dr. Elena Vasquez. She introduced herself, and her voice was casual as if she met galaxy spanning civilizations every day. Theoretical physicist with an emphasis on the theoretical part, if you know what I mean. The second human was a massive man who stood nearly 2 meters tall, and his body was covered in muscles and scars, and he carried more weapons than most military units. "Marcus Chun," he said simply, "security." The third was a young person who could not have been older than 25 human years, and they were already tapping at a tablet and muttering to themselves without looking up. "Jamie," Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing toward them. "Our data specialist and probably the smartest person in this room, including me." The fourth and fifth humans were clearly twins with identical features and matching expressions of barely contained excitement. "I am Alex," one said. "And I am Sam," the other continued. "We specialize in creative problem solving." They finished together. The sixth human was an elderly man with white hair and a gentle face, and he said nothing at all but simply smiled in a way that made Ambassador Crix feel deeply uncomfortable. "That is Howard," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Do not worry about him." High Arbiter Velthonis stepped forward and performed the traditional greeting of the conclave. "On behalf of 847 spacefaring civilizations, I welcome you to Axiom Prime," he said formally. "We are grateful that you have responded to our request for consultation." "Happy to help," Dr. Vasquez replied, and she was already looking around the docking bay with obvious curiosity. "Nice station you have here, and the artificial gravity is impressive, but the power distribution is a bit inefficient, if you do not mind me saying so." Admiral Yexolan bristled at the casual criticism, but Velthonis raised a crystalline appendage to stop him from responding. "Perhaps we should proceed to the main chamber," the High Arbiter suggested. "We can brief you on the situation." "The devouring absence," Dr. Vasquez said as they walked. "A region of space that consumes everything it touches, including matter and energy and possibly the fabric of reality itself. And it has already destroyed 4 star systems, and it is expanding at an accelerating rate. The delegation stopped and stared at her. "How do you know all of that?" Ambassador Crickstill asked. "We have been watching," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "We detected the anomaly about 2 years ago, and we have been studying it ever since." 2 years, Velthonis repeated. "You knew about this threat for 2 years, and you said nothing." "It was not our place to interfere," Dr. Vasquez replied. "You did not ask for our help, and we respect the sovereignty of other civilizations. But now we have asked." The High Arbiter said, "Yes." Dr. Vasquez agreed, and her smile widened. "Now you have asked." They reached the main chamber, and the holographic display activated to show the current state of the devouring absence. Dr. Vasquez studied the image for a long moment, and the other humans gathered around her, and Jamie finally looked up from their tablet. "Neat," Dr. Vasquez said. Admiral Yaxolan made a sound of outrage. "Neat," he repeated. "Billions of lives have been lost, and you call it neat. It is elegant," Dr. Vasquez explained without taking her eyes off the display. "Reality-consuming phenomena usually leave traces and signatures and some kind of residual evidence, but this one is clean, and almost too clean." She turned to Jamie. "What is your read?" she asked. Jamie tapped their tablet a few more times before responding. "It is not eating reality," they said, and their voice was matter of fact. "It is correcting it." The chamber fell absolutely silent. "I do not understand," Velthonis said carefully, "this region of space." Jamie continued, and they gestured at the hologram. "Something is fundamentally wrong with it, and the mathematical foundations are corrupted somehow, and the devouring absence is not a threat." They paused and looked up at the assembled representatives. "It is the universe's error correction process," they finished. Dr. Vasquez nodded as if this made perfect sense. "The universe has a bug," she explained, "and it is patching itself, and unfortunately the patch involves deleting everything the bug touched." "Can you stop it?" Ambassador Crickstill asked. The twins exchanged glances, and Alex spoke first. "Stop it," they said. "No. The universe is going to fix itself whether we like it or not," Sam continued. "But," Alex added, and their eyes lit up with excitement, "we might be able to redirect the fix," Sam finished. "Show it a better patch, and one that does not involve deleting half the galaxy." High Arbiter Velthonis processed this information carefully. "That would require," he said slowly, "rewriting the fundamental mathematics of local spacetime." Dr. Vasquez grinned, and it was the kind of grin that made the senior diplomats want to run very far away very quickly. "Yeah," she said. "That is the fun part." The humans began talking amongst themselves in rapid bursts of technical jargon that the Conclave's translation systems struggled to process. Marcus Chun, the security specialist, was drawing diagrams on a tablet, while Jamie argued with the twins about something called quantum recursion, and Howard continued to smile and say nothing. Dr. Vasquez turned back to the assembled representatives. "We are going to need access to all of your data on the absence," she said. "And we are going to need a workspace and probably a lot of coffee." "Coffee," Velthonis repeated. "It is a human beverage," Ambassador Crickstill explained. "They seem to require it for cognitive function. We also need to get closer to the absence," Dr. Vasquez added casually. "Much closer." Admiral Yaxolan stepped forward. "Every ship we have sent toward the absence has been destroyed," he said. "Approaching it is suicide." Dr. Vasquez looked at him with an expression of genuine surprise. "Of course it is," she said. "That is why it is going to be so interesting." The humans returned to their discussion, and the conclave representatives looked at each other with expressions that ranged from terror to reluctant hope. "This is a mistake," Admiral Yaxolan muttered. "Perhaps, High Arbiter," Velthonis replied, "but it is the only option we have left." And somewhere in the void, the devouring absence continued to grow, unaware that the most unpredictable species in the galaxy had just accepted the challenge of its existence. The humans worked for 72 hours straight without sleep. Conclave provided them with a dedicated research facility on the station, and they filled it with holographic displays and calculation boards and more coffee than any species had ever consumed in such a short period. Dr. Vasquez and Jamie argued constantly about theoretical frameworks, and their debates grew so heated that at one point Jamie threw a tablet across the room, and Dr. Vasquez responded by laughing and saying that was the best idea they had heard all day. The twins worked in perfect synchronization, and they would start sentences that the other would finish, and sometimes they would have entire conversations without speaking at all. Marcus Chun stood guard at the door and occasionally restrained Jamie from what they called testing a quick theory that would have collapsed the local gravity well of the entire station. Howard continued to smile and say nothing, but occasionally he would walk to one of the calculation boards and make a small adjustment, and every time he did, the other humans would stop and stare at his work with expressions of wonder. The conclave watched through observation cameras, and they understood perhaps 1% of what they were witnessing. They are insane, Admiral Yex Olin declared after watching Jamie attempt to build a device out of spare parts and what appeared to be food containers. Every single one of them is completely insane. Perhaps, High Arbiter Velthonis replied, but they are also making progress. On the 73rd hour, Dr. Vasquez called the conclave to observation deck 7, and her face showed exhaustion but also triumph. We cannot stop it, she announced to the assembled representatives. Jamie was right, and the universe is correcting an error, and you cannot stop math from doing what math does. The chamber sank into despair, but Dr. Vasquez continued, and her eyes sparkled with something that might have been madness or might have been genius. We found the original error. She activated a holographic display that showed a complex web of mathematical formulas. 18,000 years ago, someone in this region of space tried to create an artificial dimension, she explained. They were attempting to generate new space from nothing and expand the habitable universe. The Elder Ones, Ambassador Crystal whispered. There are legends about an ancient species that attempted such things before. They vanished. They failed, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. But the failure did not disappear, and it got stuck in the fabric of reality, like a splinter in skin, and the universe has been trying to fix it ever since. The devouring absence, Velthonis said slowly, is the universe's attempt to remove that splinter. Exactly, Jamie chimed in. It is like an immune response, and the universe is treating that corrupted region like an infection, and it is burning it out. How do we fix an error that is 18,000 years old? The High Arbiter asked. Dr. Vasquez smiled, and it was the most terrifying smile the conclave had ever seen. We do not fix it, she said. We make it intentional. The plan was explained over the next hour, and with each new detail, the conclave representatives grew more and more horrified. The humans intended to fly their impossible ship directly into the heart of the devouring absence, and they would use their engines to generate a controlled tier in reality. And they would essentially complete the failed dimensional creation that had caused the problem in the first place. If we give the universe what it wants, Dr. Vasquez explained, it will stop trying to take it by force, and the absence will stabilize, and instead of a wound in reality, we will have a door to a new dimension. The odds of success, the conclave's tactical AI calculated after processing the plan, are 7.3%. Higher than I expected, Marcus Chun shrugged. The twins volunteered to pilot the ship, and they seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of flying into a phenomenon that had destroyed everything else that approached it. Howard finally spoke, and his voice was calm and certain, and somehow more unsettling than anything else about the humans. I will handle navigation, he said simply. Dr. Vasquez and Jamie would manage the reality equations from the ship's main console. And if you fail, Velthonis asked, then the absence accelerates. And you lose the galaxy in decades instead of centuries, Dr. Vasquez admitted. But we will not fail. How can you be certain? The human physicist looked at the High Arbiter with an expression that was difficult to read. I am not certain, she said. Nobody can be certain about anything, especially when you are trying to rewrite the laws of physics. She paused and looked at her team, and then looked back at the assembled representatives of 847 civilizations. But I refuse to accept a universe where we do not win, she continued. That is not math, and that is not logic, and that is just being human. The ship launched 3 hours later. Every sensor on Axiom Prime tracked its progress as it flew toward the devouring absence, and every representative watched in silence as the impossible vessel approached the impossible void. The ship crossed the threshold and disappeared from all sensors. For 11 hours, the conclave heard nothing. Representatives paced and prayed, and some wept because they believed they had sent 6 beings to their deaths for nothing. High Arbiter Velthonis stood motionless at the observation window, and his crystalline form had gone completely dark. And then something changed. The devouring absence stopped expanding. It did not disappear, and it did not shrink, but it stopped. And for the first time since it had appeared, it was not consuming anything then. Something even more remarkable happened. Where there had been nothing but consuming void, there was now a nose now, up nose now, light, and the light grew and expanded and took shape until it became something that no one in the conclave had ever seen before. A door, a gateway to somewhere else, a portal to a new dimension, raw and unformed and waiting to be explored. The human ship emerged from the gateway battered and barely holding together, and its hull was scorched, and its engines were flickering, but it was intact. The transmission came through weak but clear. Told you, Dr. Vasquez said, and even through the static. They could hear the exhaustion and triumph in her voice. Also, you are welcome for the new frontier, and we are going to take a nap now. The ship limped back to Axiom Prime, and the conclave rushed to meet it. Jamie was unconscious, but alive, and the medical team said they would make a full recovery. One of the twins had aged 30 years in the 11 hours they spent inside the absence, and they joked that it was a small price to pay for saving the galaxy Marcus Chun had somehow acquired. New scars that he refused to explain. Howard was completely unchanged and still smiling. And when asked what had happened inside the absence, he simply said, "We had a conversation with the universe, and we came to an understanding." Dr. Vasquez needed a week to recover, but when she finally stood before the conclave again, she looked satisfied in a way that went beyond mere survival. The new dimension became the most valuable territory in the galaxy, and every civilization sent explorers and colonizers through the gateway, and what they found was endless possibility. At the commemorative ceremony held 1 year later, High Arbiter Velthonis formally thanked the human delegation. "I must ask you something," he said to Dr. Vasquez, who was now walking with a cane. "Were you ever truly afraid, and did you ever doubt your plan would work?" Dr. Vasquez considered the question for a long moment. "Every second," she admitted, "from the moment we launched until the moment we emerged. I was terrified, and I doubted everything." "Then how did you proceed?" The human physicist looked at the gateway they had created, and the ships passing through it, and the new frontier that stretched beyond. "Here is the thing about humans," she said. "We are small and we are fragile, and we live maybe a century if we are lucky, and the universe does not care about us, and it does not even notice us." She turned back to the High Arbiter. "So we make it notice," she continued. "We refuse to be ignored. And we see something that says this cannot be done, and we take it personally, and not because we are brave, and not because we are smart, but because we are too stubborn to accept that the universe gets to decide what is possible." She smiled, and for a moment, Velthonis understood why the conclave had feared Earth. "That is why you said do not involve humans, is it not?" she asked. Not because we might fail, but because we might succeed, and then you would have to live in a galaxy where impossible. Things keep happening. The High Arbiter had no response. The humans returned to Earth, and the Conclave endured, and the new dimension flourished with life and possibility. And somewhere in the back of every ambassador's mind, a new understanding took root. The galaxy had always feared the unknown, and they had always believed that some things were simply impossible. But now they knew the truth. There was a species out there that refused to accept limits, and that species would keep pushing, and keep fighting and keep making the universe notice them, and the galaxy would never be the same. Not because of what humanity might destroy, but because of what they would make possible, whether the universe liked it or not.